child. What's even more frightening, this little boy had never even eaten a hamburger.
Poisoning linked to a Seattle area Jack in the Box restaurant.
An investigation that will change the way you feed your family. As the epidemic began winding down, lawsuits against Jack in the Box started piling up.
We stated publicly that we are responsible for anyone who eats a Jack in the Box and becomes ill. We'll be responsible for them. Vons cannot escape their responsibility to us.
Jack in the Box wasted no time filing a $300 million lawsuit against the processor, claiming Vons had tested the meat for bacteria and withheld the results. Vons company chairman Roger Stangland gave Turning Point this statement.
Vons USDA facility successfully ground millions of pounds of beef, primarily supplied by Jack in the Box, over a 10-year period. In 1992, we were supplied with beef which contained E-Coli 0157H7. Jack in the Box never requested a test for this bacteria, which is killed by proper cooking. Unfortunately, Jack in the Box failed to cook the meat thoroughly. From this tragedy, we hope consumers will learn ground beef must be cooked thoroughly.
The Dutch decided American meat was too dangerous for their consumers and virtually stopped importing it. 2 years after the epidemic, are your kids any safer?
The problem is not solved.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel here. It's me, Hales. So let's get started into this YouTube video. This is about capitalism, big pharma, true crime, etc. But before we get started, all my YouTube videos related to this topic will be on the screen right now if you'd like to check them out. So let's get started into this YouTube video. The 1992 to 1993 Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak occurred when the E. coli bacterium, originating from contaminated beef patties, had 73 different Jack in the Box locations were linked to the E. coli outbreak poisoning. Restaurants in California, Idaho, Washington, and Nevada had been described as far and away the most infamous food poisoning outbreak in contemporary history. The bacteria sickened over 700 people in the United States in 4 states and led to 171 hospitalizations and 4 deaths. The majority of those affected were under 10 years old or younger. 4 children died, and 178 others were left with permanent injuries, including severe kidney, intestinal, and brain damage. On January 12, 1993, Phil Tarr, then a pediatric gynecologist at the University of Washington and Seattle's Children's Hospital, filed a report with the Washington State Health Department about a perceived cluster of children who had bloody diarrhea symptoms and other symptoms likely caused by the E. coli outbreak. Dr. Tarr contacted Dr. John Koskowski, the Washington State epidemiologist who started the epidemiological traceback linking those cases to undercooked hamburger patty meat from Jack in the Box restaurants. Health inspectors traced back the contamination to Jack in the Box fast food chains. Monster Burger, which had been a special promotion using the slogan "So good it's scary," and sold at a discounted price. For some reason, food safety protocols, such as the patties were not cooked long enough or at high enough temperature to kill the bacteria, were not followed. On Monday, January 18, 1993, DOH officials went public with an announcement about the source of the outbreak at the state lab. After that press conference, Jack in the Box agreed to stop serving hamburgers and to quarantine the meat patties. The victims of capitalism who were affected and either died or were severely injured from this preventable capitalism-caused tragedy. Of the infected children, 45 required hospitalization, 38 had serious kidney problems, and 21 required kidney dialysis.
The little girl would eat a hamburger and die because of it. Lauren Rudolph was 6 years old when she did.
She had beautiful red hair. Oh, look at that. I miss her coming in bed at about 6 o'clock in the morning and saying, "Mom, can I snuggle?"
Christmas Eve in San Diego, 1992. The Jack-in-the-Box epidemic had begun, and nobody knew it. All Lauren's parents knew was tremendous fear as they rushed their daughter to the emergency room. Lauren's last picture was taken with Santa. 48 hours later, her kidneys stopped working, and she had 3 massive heart attacks.
6-year-old Lauren Beth Rudolph of Southern California died on December 28, 1992, due to complications of E. coli infection. 2-year-old Brianna Knoll of Tacoma, Washington, who died on January 22, 1993 at a Children's Hospital Medical Center in Seattle of heart failure, stemming from kidney failure caused by the E. coli bacteria. 2-year-old Selena Shribs of Mountain Lake, Torrance, Washington, died on January 28, 1993. She became ill due to a secondary contact transmission from another child sick with E. coli. 17-month-old Riley Detwiler of Bellingham, Washington, died on February 20th, 1993 following a secondary contact person-to-person transmission from another child sick with E. coli poisoning. The 18-month-old boy who infected Riley had spent 2 days with bloody diarrhea in the daycare center before a clinical laboratory test could return the positive test results for E. coli. When the test results came back in positive for E. coli, county officials could not reach the child's parents during the workday. Both of the first boy's parents worked at Jack in the Box, where they regularly fed their son hamburgers from the place. Riley, on the other hand, had never eaten a hamburger, and the president was blaming the processing plant. At a 1993 press conference, the president of Foodmaker, the parent company of Jack in the Box, blamed Vons Companies, the supplier of their hamburger meat, for the E. coli epidemic. However, the Jack in the Box fast food chain knew about but disregarded Washington state laws which required burgers to be cooked to 155 Fahrenheit, the temperature necessary to completely kill E. coli, and gave excuses as to why it wasn't followed and the outbreak could have been prevented, and the processing plant blamed Jack in the Box for the blame. But at the end of the day, it's everyone from the slaughterhouse's fault to Jack in the Box restaurant's fault, aka capitalism's fault, these capitalist companies' fault. Profits over lives are the norm under capitalism, the system called capitalism. Profits over lives of animals, people, and Mother Earth herself. The subsequent investigation by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, identified 5 slaughterhouses in the United States and 1 in Canada as the likely sources of the contaminated E. coli lots of meat. Jack in the Box lost approximately $160 million, both in court from lost sales and from the lawsuit, and in February 1998, Foodmaker agreed to accept $58.5 million from Vons and 8 other beef suppliers to settle the lawsuit, which had been ignited in 1993. Media and TV, this true crime case was featured in Jeff Bennett's book Poisoned, the true story of the deadly E. coli outbreak that changed the way many Americans eat, chronicled the 1993 E. coli outbreak that killed 4 children and sickened over 700 people who ate Jack in the Box hamburgers, or were near someone who ate the hamburgers. This case was also featured in the recently announced and came out, the Netflix food documentary Poisoned. It's a documentary about how very real, very much still deadly consequences of food-borne illnesses, pathogens, and bacteria and fungus contaminants in the food we eat every day. The CDC reports that 1 in 6 Americans, a whopping 48 million people, develop food poisoning each year. Even though the case changed the beef industry forever, Poison says that consumers are far from being in the clear, especially at the grocery store. And we're not just talking about beef either. Pretty much every section of the supermarket has experienced widespread outbreaks. Like, I always go to my supermarket locally, and like the fruit is always too ripe. There's so many fruit flies near it, which means it's going to go bad, and it's gross, and I don't know how that's allowed, honestly. And also, other products being affected were like the tainted glyphosate toxic herbicide pesticide on certain cereal brands and Lucky Charms cereal. You know, it had between 230 and 400 ppm of the toxin, and other food recalls such as infant formula that, you know, killed a bunch of like infants and stuff. Big Pharma's working with these food companies, trying to keep you sick at all costs. It's time we wake up and smell the flowers on this cold-hearted truth fact.